Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Crimson and in this video we are going to be starting our look through of the Dark Souls 3 Design Works book. So this is going to be the part 3 and the final part of a little mini series that I've been doing. So far we have been covering all of the Dark Souls Design Works books, and so far we've done 1 and 2, and this is going to be 3. I have another Dark Souls art book which came with the anniversary edition of the game that came with a statue of the Elite Knight armor. However, I'm not sure if that contains new art or different art, or if that is just a combination of all of the art featured in all of these 3 books, because that book is quite large. So if it is different, I will be covering it. If not, I will not be covering it. And after this, the next From Software game that we will be covering on this channel is Elden Ring. So I'm really looking forward to that too. So let's just get right into it. So on the cover we have a picture of one of the knights from Irithyll, the Boreal Valley. I really like this armor set, and I really like the sword, especially that this one seems to have some kind of frost effect on it. Frost is a status effect that was introduced in Dark Souls 3, and it is actually very powerful. So we start off with this nice golden sheet cover of the Design Works. I will say these books, in terms of the actual quality of the book, are some of the best that I have and have seen. So we start off with the Knight of Cinders, or the Soul of Cinder armor set. This is the cover art for the game. And I actually have a statue of this guy that came with the collector's edition of Dark Souls 3 because when this game came out, I pre-ordered it and got the collector's edition. Dark Souls 3 was actually the last game that I was genuinely excited for, even though it has been over a decade since it came out, I believe. But yeah, let us continue. So here we have another picture of a warrior wearing what appears to be the Soul of Cinder armor, or maybe it is a Lothric Knight armor, I actually can't tell. But he appears to be embered, if this is meant to be the player character, and he has holding his sword and he has the blade pointed down. So here we have a picture of the Ringed City. So this is after we break Princess Filianor's egg, and the massive time skip happens and we see what has become of the Ringed City. And we see that it has gone beyond disrepair and beyond ruin to just pure dust. So much time has passed. Here we just have a little map of all of the different areas, or at least the main areas that we go through in the game. Over here is a really cool picture. So this is Slave Knight Gale, who first makes his appearance in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. And here is the Painter Girl, who is part of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, one of the main characters, but also integral to the ending of the Ringed City DLC. So I believe that this is Gale as he appears in Ashes of Ariandel versus as he appears in the Ringed City, just based on his size. Also, I forgot to mention, this book does contain art for the DLCs as well, which is so cool. So we are not just getting art for the base game, we are getting art for the DLCs as well. So next we have all of the different starting classes. So we have the Knight, the Mercenary, the Warrior, the Herald, the Thief, the Assassin, the Sorcerer, the Pyromancer, the Cleric, and the Deprived. I always either go Knight or Deprived. The Knight, just because I like his armor set. I know that's a stupid reason, but I just think that's what his armor set is one of the coolest in the game. And the Deprived is just like the blank slate, so the Deprived is really what you want for actually building your character. As with every other From Software game, I always play a Strength Faith character. So having a starting class like the Knight that has a high strength and high stamina is very, very good. But yeah, there was actually no bad starting classes in Dark Souls 3. I know in some of the previous games, some of the starting classes are objectively worse than some of the others, but all of these are very good, and they are all very, very good. It just depends on what kind of play style you like to play in these games. So, this is Chapter 1, Dark Souls 3. So here we start off in the starting area of the game. So this is us in our coffin here. We have been risen as unkindled ash since all of the chosen undead or chosen people have refused to relink the fire, and this has gone on for so long that the world is starting to come apart at the seams. So all of the previous people who either failed to link the fire or had the ability to link the fire but chose not to have been resurrected as essentially just ash. So that's the name, Unkindled Ash. So very, very cool idea for how we actually enter the world of Dark Souls 3. So this is the starting grounds. This is where we first make our way through. We make our way through this area, which has a couple of hollows in it. And then here is the vessel. This is where we pick up our Estus Flask. Now, the Estus Flask has a major change in Dark Souls 3 compared to Dark Souls 1 and 2. So, as opposed to magic having a certain amount of uses per spell, as in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3 has introduced the mana bar. So you have your standard Estus Flask, and you have your magic Estus Flask. I cannot remember what the actual name for the mana Estus Flask is called, but this refills your mana, and this allows you to cast more spells. So depending on your build, you want to try and split the Estus shards in a way that you have enough. So for someone who doesn't use magic, for example, you are going to completely ignore it and just pump everything into the main Estus Flask. Where if you are someone who uses quite a lot of magic, maybe you want more magic or more mana Estus Flask uses than your health Estus Flask, but it all depends, and again, it just adds more to player choice, which I really love, and adds a lot more to build variety, which I also really love. So, here is Ludex Gundir's arena. So Ludex Gundir is the first boss of Dark Souls 3. He's almost like the tutorial boss. This is his gate here where we enter, and he's fairly easy. He's very parryable. I always just parry him into the dirt. And then once he gets around half health, a massive kind of serpent that looks like it came from the abyss sprouts out of him. And this just changes the fight from fighting a guy in armor to fighting a monster, which I think is a very cool way to address the criticism of Dark Souls 2, that all of the bosses were just men or women in armor, where this one starts off as yet another man in armor, and then all of a sudden an abyssal beast bursts out of his armor, which just catches you off guard on your first time. Very, very cool. And then here we have the entrance to Firelink Shrine. So here is the interior of Firelink Shrine. We have all of the different thrones here. So all except one of the thrones are all empty. So these thrones would normally be filled by the people who have been chosen to link the fire, but since none of them are doing that, they are all absent, except for one character whose name is Lothric the Exiled, who is here, and he's kind of essentially the only character at the beginning who's like, yeah, I know I need to link the flame, but unfortunately I am far, far too weak. He's actually a pretty nice guy, and he's also the NPC that we can obtain boss weapons and boss spells from, which is pretty cool. So the people who would be in these seats are Aldrich, the Saint of the Deep, the Prince Lothric, the Bloodline's End, the Abyss Watchers, and Yorm of the Giants of the Profaned Capital. So these are all their thrones here, which is quite cool. And I like how each of their thrones kind of symbolizes each of the different lords. It's like this one here, for example, is quite obviously the one for the Abyss Watchers based on all of the swords piled around them. So quite cool. So here is the Wall of Lothric. So this is the starting area that we go to. And what's cool about Dark Souls 3 is in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2, we start at the very bottom and we have to make our way up to the castle. Whereas in Dark Souls 3, we actually start right at the castle and have to make our way down and then make our way back up to the castle. So it's just a nice little inversion of how things normally go. And one thing I forgot to say, Dark Souls 3's Firelink Shrine is easily the best depiction of Firelink Shrine. It blows Dark Souls 1's shrine out of the water. The NPCs that show up here, both for quests and both just that reside here, such as Andre and the old woman. You also have different NPCs, which we will talk about later. I don't want to spoil anything. But yeah, let's continue. So here is some more pictures of Lothric Castle. So this is the main castle here, as we can see. However, we don't actually start at the castle itself. We start on one of the walls of the battlements of the castle. So we are walking down here and we see some enemies that would normally spawn here, as well as these hollows which appear to have almost grown into trees or some kind of plant-like organism, and they appear to be trying to reach towards the castle. Here is a statue of the knight. I really like these statues because it shows essentially a knight putting his long sword to his neck and is about to cut his head off. So a very cool statue design. And then down here, this is the banner of the royal family of Lothric, or the Lothric royal family. It is kind of funny how the kingdom is just named after them. Previously, we had Lordran and Drangleic, whereas here is just Lothric, named after Lothric. So I guess they kind of ran out of ideas in the royal family for what to do, but what can you expect? They're all inbred anyway. So here is part of the lower areas. So this is after we descend from the wall a little bit. This is the Fountain Plaza. So there's lots of enemies that we can fight here, as well as an NPC. We fight a very powerful foe here, who is a very large knight, but he is able to be defeated quite easily, and as well as many other hollows. Before we finish this area, if he is not mentioned, I'm going to mention a character, but let's just see if he actually is mentioned. So here is the gate to the Lothric castle. So this area is a boss fight that is actually, you are able to do it the first time you find this area. However, it is extremely difficult at this stage in the game. And this area is also home to the Lothric Knights. So the Lothric Knights in this area are fairly weak. They're very strong compared to the other enemies, but they are very weak. Whereas the Lothric Knights later in the game are so powerful. One thing I want to mention just quickly that Dark Souls 3 has to do with its combat is Dark Souls 3 came out after Bloodborne. So the speed of Bloodborne's combat had a major impact on Dark Souls 3, where attacking faster is much more important than attacking slower with higher damage. So I always run a strength faith build, like I said, and there's a weapon that you can farm in this area called the Lothric Straight-Sword, which I got around my 3rd try of farming. And I scaled that with Andre the Blacksmith to scale with strength. And my first playthrough, I carried that weapon through to the end game, because no matter what other weapons I got that dealt so much more damage, it took so long to swing that by the time I was able to get off one hit, and even if that hit actually managed to strike the enemy, I was able to land about 5 or 6 hits with my longsword and do double the damage. So this is the entrance to Vort of the Boreal Valley, but before we talk about him, I want to talk about an NPC we can find here. So we can find a man in a jail cell, and his name is Grey Rat, and he is a thief, and he asks us that his wife is down in the Undead Settlement, and he asks us to go and find her for him. So we go into the Undead Settlement, and we find that she has been killed, and we take a ring off her corpse and give it to Grey Rat. After this, Grey Rat then goes to Firelink Shrine, and throughout the game he acts as a very interesting NPC. Since he's a thief by trade, he offers to go to different locations and steal for us. And each time you do that, his inventory vastly increases, and some of the items that he has and gets later on in the game are quite powerful and very interesting. So this is this is the entrance to Vort of the Boreal Valley's boss fight. This is the Grand Chamber, which is here. This is after we defeat the boss that is covering this area, which we will talk about later. I won't spoil that. I'm trying so hard not to get ahead of myself. Then here we have one of the the castle interiors, which has a bunch of Lothric Knights kind of kneeling down praying at this altar, and this is the first time where we really see the full power of the Lothric Knights. Here is a painting of an enemy that we fight later on in the game called the Winged Knight. I believe they're called the Winged Knights, or the Gertrude's Knight. I've heard Winged Knights and Gertrude Knights. I always have just called them Winged Knights. But yeah, very cool enemies. So, this is the Dragon Barracks. So this is part of an area we can find in and amongst the Wall of Lothric, and we can access this area and this bonfire a little bit later in the castle interior. I'm trying not to talk too much about the castle interior now, because I'm assuming there's a whole section for the interior of Lothric Castle. But this is the banner that we get from someone guarding the door for that boss that I did not name. So once we defeat Vort of the Boreal Valley, we are given the prompt to raise the banner, and 2 gargoyles pop up and pick us up and fly us to the next area. So this is the Lothric castle, another great picture of it with the sun shining above. Here is a picture of our player character entering the archives, which is a very late game area. I'm surprised that they are showing so many late game areas so early in this book. Okay, so I guess we are talking about the archives. So, we have the ceiling rafters. So this is a very maze-like area. It's very similar to the Duke's Grand Archives from Dark Souls 1. It has multi-stories and also some rafters which you can drop down on. Here are some of the statues that we can see. They all appear to be covered in some kind of wax, it looks like. And then here is an altar with a pool of wax, which we have the option of dipping our head into. So if you dip your head into the wax, it gives you a temporary status effect, which makes it so that the phantom enemies in this area cannot damage you. The first time I played this game, I thought this effect was permanent, and I was so terrified that my character, who I spent like 2 hours customizing, is gonna forever look like a candlestick, but no, it does wear off. So here are some of the pilgrim angels. So we will see some of the pilgrims later, but this is some of them having been transformed. These guys are all flying around the upper Lothric castle. This is our player character making our way towards the boss fight with the twin princes, Prince Lorien and Prince Lothric. And we can see a whole retinue of knights guarding the stairway. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 knights at the base of the stairs, and then we have an additional 4 knights on the stairs with another knight at the very top. So they are ready to defend this place. Yeah, until you unlock the shortcut, which is all the way up here, this is a hell of a boss run. So this is Prince Lothric's arena. So this is the area where we fight Prince Lothric. He is one of the characters that we need to defeat to bring his ashes back to Firelink to place him on the throne. So Prince Lothric is a very intelligent, gifted child. However, he is extremely deformed and extremely sickly to the point that he can barely stand. And most people in the royal family think of him as a monster based on how he appears and how he looks. However, he has a twin, or sorry, not a twin, a brother named Lorien. And Lorien is his older brother. And Lorien had a one-on-one duel with a demon prince because Lorien was an expert swordsman. And during the fight, Lorien won, and in doing so, his sword got forever imbued with demonic fire that never goes out. However, Lorien was extremely wounded to the point that he lost the use of his legs. So in this boss fight, we fight both of the princes at the same time. We fight Lorien, who attacks us with his sword, while we also have to deal with Lothric, who is clinging to his back, who is constantly firing spells at us and is able to teleport Lorien. This boss fight is infamous in Dark Souls 3. Some people love it, some people hate it. It can be quite frustrating the first few times, but personally I do really enjoy this fight. So, next up, we have, what area is this? So this is the Consumed King's Garden. So this is after we defeat, you know what, since we are covering this, I will just go back a couple of pages. So this boss that we fight here is the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. Very cool enemy. She is very deadly and has a really unique moveset. However, killing her or trying to fight her at this stage in the game when you first get here is extremely difficult, but it can be done. So I wanted to save it to try and go in order, but since we're kind of going all over the place, I thought I might as well mention it. So this is the Consumed King's Garden. So we start off with a one of the interior sections. Here is an exterior section of a man. I'm assuming this is our player character looking down at the gardens. The gardens have become fully overgrown. Then we have, where is it? We have Osiris, the Consumed King's Arena, which I believe is this one here. I actually can't tell because all of these are quite dark. And then this is the path to the untended graves. So this is the path to the untended graves. This is the interior. So this must be the Consumed King's Arena, despite it doesn't really look like it in this picture. Maybe it's just because it's very dark. So next section is the Undead Settlement. So we can see that this is leading up to the first shack that we go to. This little building here, which we can't really see much of, has our first bonfire for this area. But this area is a very dilapidated version, essentially where all the peasants live, and it has gone to hell in a handbasket, even for Dark Souls. So we start off with the plaza. So we see a tree that is being burned with all kinds of bodies hung upside down from the branches. We have a bunch of the villagers and residents of the Undead Settlement with pitchforks and crude weapons. This is actually very reminiscent of Resident Evil 4. Here is the near rickety bridge. So this is just one of the areas that we get through fairly early on in this area. This is just some more of the different areas. Actually, no, sorry, I am mistaken. I believe this is the bridge here. I read it in the wrong order, I apologize. And then this is just a derelict building. And then here we have a Goddess of Sin statue. There's also, I'm trying to see if I can find her in this picture, but in the game, there is a priestess and recruiter of the Cathedral of the Deep trying to lure people back there for reasons. We'll get to that once we get to that area. So here we have the curse-rotted Great Woods Arena exterior. So that is, I'm trying to figure out which is which because this text is not in the correct orders whatsoever. So this is the entrance to the arena here. Then here we just have a Pit of Hollows. Sorry, this is the Pit of Hollows here. So we can see our player character here with all these candles and an NPC here who we can join the Covenant. And then we have the Curse-Rotted Great Woods Arena here. I just want to see if there's actually a picture of the boss. And no, there is not, unfortunately. So essentially, the Curse-Rotted Greatwood is because so many undead and people who have been cursed have been buried in this area. One of the trees has essentially come to life with the curse and is extremely toxic. So it's not a difficult fight, it's actually very much a gimmick fight. We just have to destroy a few pustules on the boss, and that is it. We don't really have to do much else. Next we have the Crystal Sage's Arena. So the Crystal Sage is one of the people who resides in the archives. However, this Crystal Sage has kind of gone rogue and is now in the entrance to the Forbidden, one of the wooded areas. I actually cannot remember what it's called. But we fight the Sage here. It is a fairly easy boss. It's not even really a boss. It's more just like a standard enemy with a boss health bar. But it's still a cool fight nonetheless, even if it is extremely easy. So this is the road. So this is the next area that we go. So this is the Road of Sacrifices that leads us into the Forbidden Woods, and we see all kinds of structures here, as well as all kind of wooden symbols here. It's very Blair Witch-esque, and we just have a little size comparison of our player character compared to it. Next, we have some of the pictures of the Firelink Keep. So this is the swamp. So once we have cleared our way through the Crucifixion Woods, we enter the Firelink Keep, which is the signature poison swamp of this game. It would not be a Dark Souls game without a poison swamp. And we have to go through and extinguish these 4 flames in order to progress. And all of them are quite easy to find actually, but this is a massive area with loads of secrets. There's a covenant you can join, there's a dark wraith, there's the mushroom, I believe her name is Elizabeth from the Dark Souls 1 Artorias DLC, or at least her body, as well as many others, many other items, sorry. So here we have the exterior of, I still can't tell which order these are. By the way, I don't know if you guys can see, but it says here what each of these is. I'm just not sure on which one it actually is showing, or which one is which. So this looks like the exterior to the Abyss Watchers arena. This is one of the entrances. This is the Abyss Watchers arena itself, and then here we have an altar, so quite cool. Actually, sorry, no, this is the gate, this is the entrance to the Abyss Watchers, this is the arena, and this is the altar. I genuinely apologize. I'm quite tired recording this, but at the same time, I'm genuinely finding this confusing. Maybe I am just dumb. So next up, we have the Cathedral of the Deep. After we defeat the Abyss Watchers, I'm trying not to go into too much detail on the bosses because I'm sure there is a section later on that does deal with the bosses. The way these books normally work is they deal with the environments first and then enemies and bosses. So this is the next area. This is not directly after the Abyss Watchers. Once we get to the entrance of the Crucifixion Woods, or at least one of the areas near it, we have a split path where we can either go forward to the Firelink Keep or a different way to the Cathedral of the Deep. So this is the Cathedral of the Deep. So this is the entrance to it. It's a very steep staircase. And then here we have another one of the exteriors. Here are some more pictures of the Cathedral of the Deep. The Cathedral of the Deep is home to Aldrich, who is another one of the potential people who could have linked the fire. It is said that he did not gain the ability to link the fire due to virtue, but due to might alone. As it says in the lore, that he has a fondness for devouring men, and he was once the leader of this church. And he ate so many men that he got so fat that he bloated like a pig and turned to sludge. And since he is the leader of the church, all the people in this church started doing the same. So that's why they are trying to recruit people back here, especially from the undead village. They are promising them kind of salvation when they just want to consume them. Here is the interior of the Cathedral of the Deep. It is a very nice looking area. I will say one thing, From Software can make a beautiful cathedral. I don't think any other game dev can make a cathedral quite like From Software. So here we have another altar that we find, and here is a statue that we find. These are just environmental details. Next is the Cleansing Chapel. So here is another part of the cathedral, and this is the Deacons of the Deep, which is the boss fight for this area, which is this. So we fight a bunch of deacons around this massive coffin, which this coffin was for Saint Aldrich. Despite him being so mighty, he did die before he linked the flame due to not wanting to. So the Deacons of the Deep fight is not really that good. It's one of those fights where it's a mob of normal enemies, but there is one enemy who has the boss health bar, and every time you kill him, it goes to another enemy. It's kind of similar to the Rat King fight in Dark Souls 2. But after you defeat them, we find that this coffin is in fact empty. So Aldrich is meant to be dead, but as we were resurrected from the grave, so was Aldrich. But instead we find a doll from a place called Irithyll, which is very, very interesting. Here is another picture of Rosaria's bed chamber. So Rosaria is someone who is a covenant leader in the game. She acts as the primary invasion covenant in this game. She also gives you the ability to respec as well. However, it does not happen to the player character, but in and around the cathedral, and especially in her bedchamber, we find all of these gross man-slug-looking things, and it is said in the lore that these are people who tried to rebirth themselves too many times, and eventually they are turned into these horrific half-man, half-worm type creatures. So you can kind of see Rosaria here. Rosaria looks like a very beautiful woman from what we can see of her face, and it's not quite sure whether she is doing this out of love or for a more nefarious purpose. She is the leader of the Invasion Covenant, but it's not quite sure whether she herself is actually evil or not. So next up we have the Catacombs of Carthus. So the Catacombs of Carthus are located directly after the Abyss Watchers fight. So the Abyss Watchers were guarding the only way in and only way out of the Carthus Catacombs due to the Kingdom of Carthus being infested by the Abyss. And if you know anything about the Abyss Watchers, whenever the Abyss shows up, it's essentially on sight. They show no mercy. They roll up to your kingdom and essentially saying, hey, we are going to kill every single one of you, and we are going to level your kingdom to the ground so that the Abyss does not spread. That is why this is the Catacombs of Carthus, as the kingdom was essentially buried. So we fight our way through this really cool area, and eventually at the end we get to the boss, and the boss has been consumed by the Abyss fully. He was presumably the king of Carthus, and he is technically not quite consumed by the abyss, and in the boss fight, he has 3 rings on his arm which are glowing very brightly. We have to destroy these 3 rings, so it's a kind of a gimmick fight, but once we destroy these 3 rings, he is completely overtaken by the abyss, and you see him kind of scream as he is dragged into the abyss, never to be seen again. And we start this boss fight by touching this goblet, which the abyss kind of seeps out of and transports us to where he is. Here's a couple pictures of the goblet itself. Very cool design. It's like this skull with almost like an ornamental crown or ringlet among its head. So maybe this was the king's crown before he eventually died and was sentenced to the Shadow Realm. Next up, we have an area called the Smoldering Lake. So before we access this area, at the end of the Catacombs of Carthus, we have to cross a ladder. Oh, sorry, not a ladder, a bridge. Once you cross the bridge, however, if you destroy it, you are able to climb down to access a completely different area. And that area is the Smoldering Lake. So this area is what has become of Ash Lake from Dark Souls 1, and it has become a absolute hellscape. It's full of poison, it's full of lava, there's skeletons and enemies everywhere. There is this massive ballista which constantly fires at you until you manage to get around and take it out. And yeah, we get a nice little kind of mini dungeon as well as a cool boss fight, but again, not talking about the bosses quite yet. So the next area is Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. So to access this area, we need to first have acquired that doll from Aldrich's grave. So this is where we make our way through, and this is my personal favorite area in the entire game. So this is Anor Londo. So this is essentially the lower levels of Anor Londo. However, it has been usurped by 2 men, and we will get to them shortly. So it is a beautiful area. It's lit at nighttime, so you have this really cool snowy design with the moon shining down. Here we have some of the aqueducts that we have to go through to access some of the areas, but we mainly just make our way through the streets of Irithyll. Here are some of the statues that we find in Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. One of these statues is actually quite important for one of the endings, but we will get to that when we get to the characters. Again, here are some more statues that we find, and here we find some of the paintings that we find in Irithyll. This is also our first area where we first are reintroduced to the Silver and Black Knights. Actually, no, sorry, just the Silver Knights, I apologize. And when we first see them, we see the Silver Knight gazing longingly at a picture of Guinevere. However, what's really funny is it's a trap, because while the knight is looking at Guinevere genuinely, as the player sneaks up to him, there is another Grey Knight on a ledge up and behind you, and he shoots you with a massive great bow. So it's so funny on your first playthrough. So next we have another picture of some more about the Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. So this is I believe this is the interior. Just want to check the next page. So this is an area where we fight the boss, the Pontiff Sullivan. So I think this is meant to be Sullivan here. But he has usurped the royal family. So that's essentially Gwyn's family from Dark Souls 1, and has taken power for himself. And over here is Aldrich, Devourer of the Gods. So, Aldrich, as we mentioned, was a person who could have linked the flame but chose not to. He was known as a devourer of men, but here he is called the devourer of the gods. So, what happened was when Pontiff Sullivan took power, he imprisoned the remaining members of the royal family in Anor Londo, and he made a deal with Aldrich, and he allowed Aldrich to consume one of the royal family, and that member of the royal family is Gwendolyn. So when we fight him, we are actually fighting what is left of Gwendolyn, who has left to be consumed, as he uses lots of his own magic, as opposed to actually fighting Aldrich himself, which is quite cool, because Aldrich at this point is essentially just a massive blob. So that's one way to go through to Irithyll. That's the critical path for one way. This is another area which we go through by going down to the lower levels, going through some of the aqueducts, and entering the Irithyll dungeon. So this area is very claustrophobic. If you have played Demon Souls, it's very similar to the Prison of Hope. There is an enemy type in here which completely drains your health bar. When I mean drains your health bar, I don't mean takes your health away, but makes your health maybe from what you have it fully leveled up to say like 10 HP or something. It's crazy, so very frustrating area on your first playthrough. But after that, we make our way down and we enter the Profaned capital. So this is the subterranean ruins. We cross this bridge after we exit the prison or the dungeon. And then this is the interior of the capital. The capital, again, is in ruins, and we find that all of its citizens have been burned. Burned so badly that they have all essentially melted into a pile of meat. Here is another picture of the Profaned capital. So you can see a mixture here of some of the people that have been burned, as well as all of the treasure and gold that was left around. So this area is covered in burnt corpses, scavenging animals, and treasure beyond our wildest dreams. And here is our player character. So this is the throne of Yorm the Giant. So Yorm the Giant is the ruler of the Profaned capital and another one of the great souls that we need. Again, someone who refused to link the first flame. And there's a whole quest for another character about him as well, but we will get to that when we get to the character section. And here are just some of the statues that we find in this area. Here is some pictures. So this is the arena where we fight Yorm. So Yorm is located back here on his throne. And we have all these pillars and all these candles around us. Next up is another area. This is actually technically a secret area. It's not quite a secret, but it is a very optional area which most players will not find on the first time around. So as you are exploring the outskirts of the Irithyll dungeon, you come across a couple dragons in this pose, and if you have beaten Osiris the Consumed King and proceeded through the invisible door, you get a gesture which gives you this. And if you do this gesture next to the dragons, you fall asleep and you awaken on this mountain fastness castle called the Archdragon Peak. So here is a picture of one of the dragons. This is the Dark Souls 3 version of the dragon. To me, it just looks like a starved rat rather than a dragon, but that's just me. And then here is a picture, sorry, a statue of one of the bosses. This is a statue of the Nameless King. So this is inside the Dragon Peak. So we start off with the Dragonkin Mausoleum. So you can see it is a very old looking structure, very it's old style architecture type temple, but it does have some damage like in the roof. And then here are two exteriors. So we see that someone has kind of constructed these very shanty looking bridges and walkways, almost like scaffolding around these different types of areas. Next we have the Great Belfry. So this is an area that we make our way through, and we find an armor set here which belongs to a character from Dark Souls 1, and that is Dragonslayer Ornstein, which is very interesting that we find that here, because why would someone who serves Lord Gwyn and even has in his name the Dragonslayer have his armor located in a temple worshipping dragons? Kind of gives you a little bit of food for thought, in my opinion at least. Maybe I'm looking too much into it because I'm just a massive nerd for this stuff. So this is the area that I was talking about. So this is where we do the gesture to reach Archdragon Peak. As you can see, there's a bunch of dragons here assuming the pose, and then we do the same. Here's our player character. So this area is the final area, and it is called the Dreg Heap, which leads us to the Kiln of the First Flame, which is the very same kiln as in Dark Souls 1. And we see an eclipse up here, so very cool imagery, and is a absolute reference to the best manga series of all time, Berserk. If you are at all familiar with From Software games, you know that Miyazaki loves Berserk, and Berserk is a heavy influence on the Dark Souls games. So as you can see, this is literally the end of the world. You can see all of these buildings and stuff kind of forming into each other, falling apart at obscure angles that should not be possible. So it just goes to show that the state of the world is in absolute disarray due to no one activating the first flame. So this is another view here where we see the same thing. So we're looking at forward. This is the kiln here with the eclipse more prevalent. And then here is the kiln itself, where we fight the final boss, the Soul of Cinder. So I will talk about this boss a little bit. The Soul of Cinder is essentially an amalgamation of every single person that has linked the flame since Dark Souls 1, including your player character is in there somewhere. So the Soul of Cinder has a variety of movesets, from swords to spears to fast attacks, defensive attacks, heavy attacks, magic, miracles, and everything. There's even a stage where he starts using the same moveset as Gwyn from Dark Souls 1, which is so cool when you first see it and you first realize, oh, that's actually Gwyn. So yeah, really, really cool. And this is where we get our endings. There are 4 endings we can choose from, but I am going to talk about one ending now, and that is the ending to re-link the fire. So if we re-link the fire, essentially it quote-unquote fixes the world. But when we re-link the fire is so small, it barely even lights ourselves on fire. Like it's not even a shadow of its former self. It's barely even its former self. It's insinuating that this has been done so many times that the fire is just, like, there's literally nothing left. If you remember from Dark Souls 1, when we link the fire, the whole kiln goes up in a blazing inferno, Whereas this, it's like we have maybe a couple of little flames around us, but that's it, and it's actually very, very sad in my opinion. And the next section is the bosses. However, that is going to be it for this video. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I actually really enjoyed making this. Dark Souls 3 is one of my favorite games, and just being able to talk about it is always a treat. So thank you so much for watching. I want to give a quick shout out to my 2 Patreon members. So thank you, Slice of Life for Life, and thank you, Mary the Otaku. Your patronage means the world to me. And thank you, the rest of you, for your viewership. That also means the world to me. Now, if you are listening to this video or watching this video as you are laying down or trying to go to sleep or relaxing, this is the end of the video. So I would click off now before an ad might play and disturb you. So thanks again for watching. Part 2 will actually be made literally as soon as I'm done filming this. So thanks again. My name has been Crimson, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good evening.